Episode 3 dropped some huge hints about what's to come this season. Let's break down the Seraphites, that army of WLF, and all the Easter eggs in Joel's house. Here's what Episode 3 changed and kept the same compared to the game. Episode 3 immediately kicks off with a few distinct changes from the narrative of The Last of Us Part 2, starting with the town of Jackson reeling from the infected assault and Tommy cleaning his brother's body, and being tragically reminded by Joel's broken watch that he's finally been reunited with his daughter.
Give Sarah my love.
Things move at a slower pace in this version of Wyoming. It's months before the town is starting to look like something close to what it was before the attack, none of which occurred in the game. There, the scene jumps straight from Ellie on the floor at the cabin to her room, cleaned up but still bruised from the encounter, and itching to ride off to hunt Abby down. Ellie's slow recovery in the show is at least more realistic than it is in the game, which makes sense. Nobody wants to play through 3 months of pushing square to breathe in a hospital bed. And at the same time, nobody watching the show would buy that she's back to full health from a collapsed lung just because she found a bottle of rubbing alcohol and a bandage. So letting her recover like that makes perfect sense physically, as well as emotionally, because despite the months to cope with losing Joel, and despite her clipped, sarcastic responses to Gail's questioning,
yeah, I miss him. He meant a lot to me. So, yeah, upset and sad.
She's obviously struggling with PTSD and a deep void that time hasn't even begun to fill. That emotional scene of her walking through Joel's house happens just like it does in the game, but mostly what you see in the gameplay is rage, with only glimpses of the quieter aspects of her trauma coming through flashbacks and journal entries. And it's not until much later that we get a several months later jump that shows that no, time and bloodshed never really helped Ellie get over Joel. When Ellie is wandering through Joel's house, there are a lot of interesting details that come and go almost too quickly to spot. Some of them are callbacks to the game, and there are more than a few Easter eggs from different parts of the story. For example, Joel's broken watch is still set to the time that Sarah died, and when Ellie peeks into her old room, you can see a brown fedora on a dresser that looks suspiciously like the hat from the flashback at the museum in the game.
You want to try it on?
I do not.
Your loss.
The walls are also plastered with her sketches and drawings, a side of Ellie that you mostly only see through her journal entries throughout the second game. Other details came straight from the game, like the hand-carved animal figurines to showcase Joel's hobby, and Joel's coffee cup, the same one he was drinking out of on the porch the night after the dance. Of course, one of the main reasons Ellie doesn't sneak off earlier, fully recovered or not, is because she doesn't know anything about Abby and her crew until Dina eventually tells her they're part of a group called the WLF based out of Seattle.
And I knew that if I told you where they were, you'd just start pulling your tubes out and crawling on your hands and knees to get there.
I don't give.
Fans of the game know that she learns that from Tommy right after the fact, and only agrees to wait when Tommy asks her to hold off so he can talk to Maria about how many men they can spare for the revenge squad.
Give me a day to talk to Maria. Okay? There's gotta be some folks you can spare.
Then, wouldn't you know it, he sneaks off in the middle of the night, that bastard. Things are a lot more democratic in the show, where the decision to send out a hunting party is left to a town meeting, where anyone who has an opinion on the matter gets a say, including Seth, surprisingly enough, and Tommy is a lot less interested in straight-up vengeance. His priorities here lie in Jackson. In the end, Ellie and Dina sneak out anyway, which weirdly enough is another reversal of the game's events. Maria just lets them go after Tommy dips out. Before Ellie and Dina set out for Seattle, Episode 3 drops in a scene with a group of Seraphites, or Scars, depending on who's talking about them, trying to escape the ongoing conflict in Seattle. They've got their bows, and you know they know how to use them, but this particular contingent seems to be scared to death of the WLF.
Demons?
Wolves.
What gives? The WLF in the game is certainly large and well-organized, but their resources are spread out, and the Seraphites don't exactly live in terror of them. In fact, when you first run into them as Ellie, they have a wolf captured and strung up from a lamppost. And when you first fight them as Abby, they ambush the WLF patrol. The Seraphites maintain control over their region of the city, and they've repelled attacks from groups of WLF without too much trouble.
Sarah would try attacking their island.
Not like this. Not with everyone.
it sure looks like the dynamic in the show is going to be a little different and possibly contain a larger and more lethal WLF presence. Later in the episode, when Ellie and Dina come across the remains of those Seraphites, they find spent casings from a ton of different weapons, showing the attackers were well armed, but notably don't see any WLF among the fallen, which means they must have hit that group with pretty overwhelming force. Another change in that scene with the Seraphites is that the cult seems a little more sympathetic than they were portrayed in the game, at least going by this small glimpse we get into their ways. These could very well just be defectors who don't agree with every belief of the larger cult, sure. They are trying to leave, after all.
Follow her words, we obey her teachings, but we keep ourselves safe.
But aside from Yara and Lev, who's an apostate and on the outs already, the majority of Seraphites you cross in the game pretty much give you one of three options. Get shot with an arrow, or get beaten with a giant hammer. They're hardened soldiers who can be terrifying and downright brutal when it comes to punishing anyone who crosses them. Let's just say you don't want to get your wings clipped. But of course, one of the points hammered into you in the games is that everyone is sympathetic if you spend enough time in their shoes. WLF, Seraphites, a rogue man who takes out an entire hospital staff. They're all simultaneously their own heroes and someone else's bad guy. So it's probably best not to get too comfortable with the idea that Scars are completely decent folks just yet. The Last of Us knows how to get things done. Want to pluck at a few heartstrings to the tune of Future Days? Throw in an emotional gravesite goodbye. Tommy says in this episode that Joel was buried about 10 miles outside of town, and Ellie makes a point to swing by when she and Dina leave Jackson. Then, in a detail that wasn't in the game at all, she sprinkles a few coffee beans over his final resting place. Joel did love his dark brew, and it's a nice touch to add to the show, especially since coffee beans are such a rare commodity in this apocalyptic world.
I really miss coffee.
Other than that added detail, the grave scene plays out pretty much exactly as it did in the game, featuring a teary, wordless goodbye before she goes and rejoins Dina. A little longer, sure, and a little farther away from home, but as far as impact, it's identical. When Episode 2 shifted the group patrols from the way they were in the game, a lot of the game's more notable early conversations and encounters got changed too. In the game, Ellie and Dina hole up in Eugene's hideout and have a talk about everything that happened at the dance. They never did have that conversation in the second episode, but Episode 3 makes it happen in a different setting, a tent during their trek to Seattle. And while Dina is the one who rates their kiss a 6 out of 10 in the game, in the show, Ellie has that line.
Okay, fine, 6.
You 6.
That's not bad.
That sucks!
It's a small change to be sure, and one that doesn't shift anything terribly meaningful in the storyline, but it leads to Dina's revelation that she and Jesse got back together while Ellie was in the hospital. Considering the new 3-month time jump, that's a pretty important detail if the show follows some of the game's other developments down the line. There's only so much you can reasonably expect a show to carry over from a game that takes 20+ hours to play, and Episode 3 understandably brushes aside a lengthy sequence of events that happen when Ellie and Dina first get to Seattle. Remnants of Fedra's occupation constantly get in their way, including a big annoying gate with a nice little love letter to Fedra graffitied on one side.
Let's find our way past this, Fedra gate.
Very creative.
You have to ride around, find gasoline for the generator that will power the gate, hope you didn't miss the note in the guard shack with the code to open the gate once you do all that, and yeah, it's a whole big thing. Just to get to the first place you need to go in the city. For the show, Ellie and Dina just trot right up to the city, which is fine. They'll have more important things to deal with than generators and gate codes before long. When you first meet Abby in the game, she's a complete mystery, and it's only as the story progresses over hours of gameplay that you start to get an understanding of what she's been through and what her motivations are. And like the grave scene in Episode 1, the second episode makes it crystal clear that the show is intent on jump-starting that emotional connection between her and the audience. The episode opens with a distorted dream/memory of Abby watching her younger self in the hallway just outside of the pediatric surgery room at St. Mary's Hospital, warning her not to keep going.
His brains are on the floor.
Only then does it cut to the familiar game scene of Abby starting from her sleep, waking up from what appears to be a nightmare, although the game doesn't show it at that point. Dreams and flashbacks like this are a major piece of the emotional narrative, cluing gamers in to the events bridging the first and second game. Ellie often relives some of her best and worst moments in dreams just like this, while Abby's dreams also show how tormented she is, even after doing what she thought she had to do. Changing when and where those flashbacks occur changes the shape of the story slightly, but if the point is to hit some of those emotional beats a little more quickly, it's working. Another small change that happens early in the episode is the way Abby and her friends find Jackson, like really find it. At the end of episode 1, we saw the entire Seattle crew cresting a ridge to see the lights of Jackson twinkling in the distance, but in the harsh light of day, the gang has the same reaction they do in the game.
It did not look like that in the dark.
Nobody expected to find an entire town, let alone one with defenses and a functioning power grid. Just like in the game, this discovery leads to a conversation about whether Abby's vendetta is really worth the risk. The difference is, in the game, that discussion happens between Abby and Owen, after Owen takes Abby off alone to show her what they're up against. Ultimately, this change doesn't matter much because the outcome is the same. Abby follows one of Jackson's patrols on her own and runs into a little more than she bargained for. This is more of an Easter egg than a specific change, but it's a pretty cool one. Naughty Dog, the game developer behind The Last of Us, doesn't have a ton of properties behind its name, but it makes up for lack of quantity with a hard focus on quality. Jak and Daxter, Uncharted, The Last of Us, they've got a history of rock-solid games, and a few months ago they announced a brand new franchise called Intergalactic: The Heretic Prophet, which focuses on a spacefaring bounty hunter named Jordan A. Munn. What's the connection? Well, Jordan in Intergalactic is voiced and motion captured by Tati Gabrielle, Nora, this person. What makes the nod even more on the nose is the fact that Nora shaved her head sometime in the years between when they buried their friends and when they found Jackson, something that never happened in the game. Just like Munn does in the first trailer for Intergalactic. Nothing like a little subtle cross-property promotion, right? One big detail the show is leaving in is the focus on Ellie's guitar, which becomes symbolic of the tether between her present and past with Joel.
Some folks call this thing here a guitar.
Funny.
When episode 2 shows Ellie waking up after the dance, the very first shot lingers for about half a second on her guitar sitting in a stand in her bedroom. It's a blink and you'll miss it detail, but if you remember in episode 1, Joel took it to restring it for her, and when she walks by him later that night, he's strumming it on the porch, though that encounter ends with Ellie leaving without a word. In the game, she stops to talk with him. In hindsight now, what looked like a simple nod to that important game conversation is starting to feel like more of a build-up than anything else. The fact that she has her guitar back in the morning is telling, suggesting that more went down that night than we were shown. Like we said, episode 2 introduced some major changes, and the first really big one is the way the patrols get structured. In the game, Ellie and Dina go out together with Joel and Tommy already out on patrol. The show instead pairs Ellie with Jesse, while Joel goes with Dina. Everything from that point on changes the character dynamics. Joel and Dina now rescue Abby from the zombie horde and head to the cabin together. Meanwhile, Jesse is the one who takes Ellie to Eugene's secret weed farm to ride out the blizzard, which we'll get into in a second. Even more intriguing, in the show, Ellie was actually looking forward to going out with Joel that morning, once again hinting that something changed the night before.
So you two hash it out. All right.
Switching up patrol buddies caused plenty of small ripple changes in the show, most too minor to get into, but it led to at least 2 that have more meaning. So Ellie and Jesse take shelter in that 7-Eleven.
Am I hallucinating?
Maybe. You see a 7-Eleven full of weed?
Yep.
Then no.
Which is a big change on its own. In the game, Eugene's grow operation is in the basement of a library, and he started it up himself rather than finding it like in the show. The scene in particular is kind of a jarring mix of pixel-perfect details lifted from the game and brand new additions, whereas in the game, it's the setting for Ellie and Dina awkwardly trying to figure out their relationship following the dance. Its purpose in the show seems to be mainly to remind viewers about this Eugene guy we haven't seen yet, including another reference to Joel killing him.
That was a raw deal. Joel having to put him down.
The second major change that stems from switching the patrol buddies comes when Abby enters the picture. She heads off alone and, like in the game, accidentally stumbles on a bunch of infected. She's rescued at the last second by Joel and Dina. Again, that would have been Joel and Tommy in the game, but in both of them, it doesn't take her long to figure out that she just caught the biggest lucky break ever.
I'm Tommy. That's Joel. What's your name?
Abby.
Up here!
That moment specifically actually fixes a problem people had with that scene in the game. Given all the enemies Joel and Tommy have made in the past, a lot of fans figured they probably wouldn't be so eager to give their names to strangers.
Y'all act like you heard of us or something.
Having Abby simply overhear Joel's name instead gets around that. Putting Dina on patrol with Joel also makes her a witness, more or less, to what happens at the cabin. She learns some names and gets some details about Abby's crew before she gets put under. But most importantly, as far as this episode is concerned, it frees up Tommy to command Jackson's defenses.
Jackson, hold!
There are a few things we have to talk about in regards to the massive infected assault on Jackson. In the game, it never happened, so let's get that big element out of the way. But one of the details that was easier to miss was how that massive horde knew to make a heel turn and storm down the mountain. If you remember in episode 1, there's a brief shot of a worker breaking open a ceramic drain pipe that's been clogged up with roots or branches. And at the end of the episode, you see live cordyceps writhing in that mass. In episode 2, moments before the infected converge on Jackson, another worker exposes another cluster of live cordyceps to the fresh air, and if you're paying attention, that's when the infected following Dina and Joel change directions. In Season 1, the show established that the cordyceps infection works as a hivemind that's connected via vast underground mycorrhizal webs, pretty much like real-life mycelial networks. Disturb one section and another section far away can feel it, so the timing may have been pretty dang coincidental, but that worker smashing a pipe at that moment basically brought every nearby infected running like moths to a lamp. Even before all the infected come knocking, it's obvious that Jackson's defenses are way more involved than they were ever shown to be in the game, unless the plan there was to throw snowballs at them or something.
Oh, suck it!
Again, the game just kept the focus on Abby for all of this. She makes a run for it with Joel and Tommy, with just dozens of infected on their heels, and her friends light them up with Molotov cocktails at the gates outside their cabin. It's almost a little anticlimactic compared to what happens in the show. Jackson is outfitted for a full-on medieval siege, with defenses up and down the ramparts and drop-down chutes for gas-filled barrels, not to mention well-thought-out backup plans to funnel the infected down a Main Street gauntlet into the waiting embrace of a line of flamethrowers. It's a thrilling, nail-biting action sequence, and the people of Jackson barely survive the assault, though in the end, they persevere and live to fight another day. Unfortunately, you can't say the same for every character in this episode. Let's face it, the second Joel walked into the mountaintop chateau with Abby, anyone who's played the game was already scanning the room for a bag of golf clubs. Morbid? Sure, but they knew that the inevitable was coming. To its credit, the episode didn't pull any punches with this scene, although it did swap out a few details. What changed? Let's break it down. Dina was tranquilized with a syringe versus Tommy getting pistol whipped, reinforcing the idea that these former Fireflies in the show have at least a little more compassion than they do in the game.
We're not gonna hurt her. Not if you cooperate.
Joel guesses that they're former Fireflies in the show, which he doesn't do in the game, and he also gets another chance to tell the truth about what he did at St. Mary's Hospital, which he finally does. As for Abby, she has a whole lot more to say in the show, telling Joel exactly who she is and why she's after him. On one hand, adding in all that dialogue fills the viewer in on a lot of backstory, but there was something heartbreakingly simple about the way Abby did it in the game. She didn't care if he knew who she was. All she cared about was getting her revenge.
You don't get to rush this.
Then there's the part where Abby breaks the golf club and starts using her fists. It's not in the game, but this change is actually perfectly suited to her game character. Her playstyle is all about brute strength, a format that sort of fills in for the absence of Joel throughout the game, even down to little things like moving planks and ladders to get past obstacles. In that light, her getting hands-on in this scene even has shades of Joel's savage attack on the Boston Keyguard in Season 1. Finally, the writers opting to have Abby stab Joel with the broken club shaft, then have Ellie crawl towards his body was somehow even more brutal than the way it went down in the game. And, well, we're not sure what else we can say about that except, damn, Abby. As the episode comes to a close, we get a couple interesting final changes. You might think the shot of Joel's shrouded body getting dragged through the snow was an unnecessary addition, especially after everything we saw him go through. But it does serve a purpose. If they'd left it at Joel just lying on the floor of the cabin, it'd be easy to leave viewers clinging to a tiny ray of hope that he somehow miraculously survived. It happens in TV shows all the time, but ending on such an unambiguously direct image takes the final step to set it in stone. Sorry, he's dead. But let's end this on a slightly better note. Here's a fun Easter egg. The song that plays over the ending montage is being sung by Ashley Johnson, who voices Ellie in the game and had a cameo as Ellie's mom in Season 1. The song is called Through the Valley, and if you beat The Last of Us Part 2 on the permadeath mode, the same song plays over the end credits. After a brief recap of Ellie and Joel's last scene from Season 1, The Last of Us Season 2 opens on a group of new characters and quickly makes it clear that this is what remains of the Fireflies from St. Mary's Hospital laying their loved ones to rest following Joel's brutal rampage through the hospital at the climax of the first season. One of them, Abby, swears revenge on Joel for what he did, apparently ready to put every other priority on hold until she gets it.
Supposedly he'd take us all in.
Not until we find Joel.
Right off the bat, this is a major change from the game, which first introduces us to Abby fairly early, but doesn't immediately give the player very much information about her. All you know is that she and her friend Owen have been looking for the town of Jackson, specifically for an unnamed man who lives there. Abby heads off alone in the direction they saw a patrol going and gets saved by that patrol, which is Tommy and Joel coincidentally, during an encounter with the infected. Abby brings them back to her cabin to ride out a snowstorm, which is where Abby reveals who they really are. Even then, the entirety of Abby's storyline doesn't play out until the back half of the gameplay, and the game never shows a funeral service for their dead friends. Given the structure of the game, though, it does make a lot of sense to introduce Abby, her crew, and a bit of their motivation early like this. Even though they don't pop back in until the end of the episode, which shows them finding Jackson as a group, these changes give the audience a grounded introduction to Abby and strongly hint that Joel may not be safe for much longer. While the show opens on Abby and the Fireflies, The Last of Us Part 2 opens much differently. It begins with a scene of Joel unloading his secret onto Tommy, telling him how he killed all the Fireflies to save Ellie, who's immune. It serves as sort of a recap of the pertinent parts of the previous game, while showing the weight Joel still carries. Tommy, for his part, seems a little disturbed by everything Joel did, but after they ride back to town, he lets Joel know that his secret is safe with him.
I'll take it to the grave if I have to.
Episode 1 features a scene that serves the same purpose, but changes two vital parts of that exchange. First, Joel isn't confessing to Tommy, he's talking to a psychotherapist in Jackson named Gail. Second, and more importantly, he doesn't really tell her his secret. He simply implies that he's done something terrible.
Did you do something to her?
It shows Joel opening up a little, but he doesn't go into any detail about the hospital, and certainly never mentions that Ellie's immune to the infected. Clearly, he still has more he needs to get off his chest. Speaking of Gail, she's an entirely new addition to the story in the show. During their therapy session, she reveals that her husband Eugene died recently. Between the name and all the marijuana talk, it's pretty clear who her husband was in the game.
Oh my god, it's weed. That's a lot of dead weed.
Players know that Jackson's resident secret farmer doesn't really feature in the game, at least not directly. His story comes together via photos and character dialogue, but it amounts to the fact that he left his wife and daughter to join the Fireflies as a young man and died of a stroke in his 70s, somewhere around 6 months before the main events of the game, going by his last entry in the scouting logbook. From the notes and photos in the game, the impression is that it was years ago when Eugene left his wife, whose name was Claire, to join the Fireflies. Dina describes him as a lonely man, which suggests that by that point in his life he didn't have a wife around anymore to widow. This exchange with Gail shows that Eugene's story is being drastically altered for the show.
It's my first birthday without my husband in 41 years.
And as for the stroke, well, apparently Eugene meets his maker in a different way on TV.
You shot and killed my husband. You killed Eugene.
The first episode of the new season also fleshes out the residents of Jackson and builds out the world much more than the game does. That scene where Joel and Maria are talking about running low on living space never happened. By this point in the game's story, all Maria has done is send Ellie and Dina out on patrol and send Jesse out to find out why Tommy and Joel's patrol is taking so long. Of course, this wasn't much of a surprise. Season 1 also gave Maria more screen time and, frankly, importance than the game ever did, fleshing out both her story and her relationship with Tommy. In the games, you get the sense that all of that is important to her, but the show really takes its time to make that apparent. Life in and around Jackson in general gets a few more notable additions in the first episode, like the town council meeting, but what's even more interesting are the details it does copy from the game. We're talking little things like the oddly specific detail of a tractor pulling logs through the streets, or the grocery store's July Employee of the Month. It just goes to show that for all the changes to the story, the world of the show has the same level of care and attention to detail that made fans love the game. Series creators Neil Druckmann and Craig Mazin always said that Season 2 was going to have a bigger scope with more infected than the first season, and Episode 1 already lives up to that promise. One type of infected players encounter in the second game is called a Stalker. They show up briefly in the first game, but the second game is where you begin running into them in larger numbers. These newly infected jerks creep around and hide behind corners, turning encounters with them into a freaky game of cat and mouse, where you're the mouse. They first show up when Ellie gets to Seattle, and on her first run-in with the Stalkers, Ellie calls them out by name.
Stalkers.
Episode 1 changes nearly everything about that. Credit where it's due, the Stalker itself is terrifyingly accurate. But the change is that Ellie runs into it much closer to home when she falls into the lower level of the Green Place market. It's also a type that's completely new to the people in this world. They've never seen one before and don't have a name for it like they do for all the other infected types.
It did what we do. Took cover, planned, waited, lured me in. Stalking.
One unexpected outcome of Ellie's Stalker encounter for game fans was the fact that it bit her. Now, Ellie does get bit again in the game, right there on her side, in the same spot the show's Stalker got her, but it doesn't happen until a whole lot later in the game, and she doesn't bother trying to hide it. She does in the show, though, first covering it up when Dina bursts in and later painstakingly cutting the spot with a knife and stitching it back up to disguise it as a normal wound. At this stage in the story, it makes sense that she would do that. She's still in Jackson, surrounded by people who don't have any idea about the immunity she spent so long hiding. Did you notice those scars over the bite mark on her arm? Yeah, that's the distance she'll go to keep her secret safe. On one hand, seeing the town dance in the first episode was a surprise, although it makes sense chronologically. The night's events play out pretty much beat for beat the way they happened in the game.
Hey. It's a family event.
In the game's narrative, the dance is shown through a flashback, but again, it's not too much of a shift in the timeline. When the game picks up with Ellie's present storyline, she's literally waking up the night after the dance happened. Characters keep talking to her about it, but as a player, you don't really know everything that happened until you get to those flashbacks.
Wait, you kissed Dina?
Oh.
Another tiny change is that the game's dance wasn't a New Year's Eve party. It happened in March, but as far as the show is concerned, that was probably a decent detail to change. After all, how many parties can a ragtag commune of survivors really afford to have every year? In the game, scouting patrols out of Jackson follow a pretty simple format. Teams of 2 head out to cover predetermined routes roughly once a month. They rescue anyone who needs rescuing and take out any infected they see, log their activity in a book, then head back to town. Ellie's first patrol with Dina happens the same way in the show, but with a few crucial differences. The first difference is the number of scouts. It's a group of 5 in the show. Second, those green and yellow flags are a new addition.
Today's all clear sign is yellow. Yellow good, green bad.
But third, well, to put it simply, a lot more happens on that scouting trip in the game. Ellie and Dina do run into infected at Green Place Market, although it's a moose rather than a bear that led them to it, but they don't go right back to Jackson afterwards, to say the least. It's a relatively small juggling of the order of events, but it's already clear in the first episode that the show is following a more streamlined, direct timeline. Let's look at one more example. There's a shot very close to the end of the episode after the altercation at the party that shows Ellie walking back home in the snow. As she passes Joel's house, she sees him sitting outside on the front porch tuning her guitar. She pauses briefly, they make eye contact, and she then continues on without a word. Given everything that just happened in the episode, this cold exchange doesn't feel out of place in the least. That said, it's a fascinating addition to the episode for the simple reason that this scene does happen in the game as the very last scene of the game. And there, she does stop to talk to him. They have a strained but honest conversation that shows you the unflinching truth about where their relationship was at that point. There are obvious reasons that conversation didn't happen in this episode, but nodding to it there at the end definitely gave some game fans a few emotional flashbacks of their own. Maybe it's even there to remind us know-it-all gamers that there are going to be plenty of surprises in the show that we can't predict. After all, it's not like we expected any cordyceps to start growing out of a pipe in the middle of Jackson either, did we?